or so. Thank goodness for that. All right, we'll get started. I'm Ken Kirky, Chief Partnerships Officer with All Home. We have a really important, timely meeting today. As I think probably everyone on this call knows, emergency housing vouchers are set to expire in 2026, coupled with a whole lot of other mischief at the federal level. This is concerning. But fortunately, we have leaders in the region who are stepping up to address this funding cliff. We're going to hear from some of them today in a panel discussion, learn what is happening in the region to head off the funding cliff, and then we're going to share solutions in a group discussion. We'll have some updates on some things going on at All Home, and with that, we should get started. I'm going to turn it over to Susanna Parsons, my colleague, to kick things off.
Thanks, Ken, and good morning, everyone. It's great to see you. Before we jump into our panel discussion, I'm going to spend a few minutes framing up particularly the impact of housing choice vouchers and emergency housing vouchers in California and the Bay Area as a way to set the context for our conversation today. So here on this slide is a snapshot of the impact of housing vouchers by the numbers. So in California, our state receives 15% of all Section 8 vouchers nationwide. The 9 largest housing authorities in California comprise roughly 10% of the total Section 8 budget. And our state is also home to an estimated 40% of mixed status households. So, if we could go back to that slide. Thanks. So you can see a significant impact of the Section 8 program in our state. And then in the Bay Area, this data is pulled from a great brief on housing choice voucher households put out by the Turner Center a few months ago that folks may have seen. I know we've got our friends from Turner Center in the room today, so excited to hear from them shortly as well. But you can see here just a snapshot of housing choice vouchers households in our region. Examples, 51%, over half of voucher households in Sonoma County include someone with a disability. There are roughly 22,000 total households being served by vouchers in Alameda County. And in San Mateo, a little over a third of voucher households derive most of their income from wages. So encourage folks to take a closer look at that snapshot from the Turner Center about voucher households here in the region and across the country. On the next slide, I'll dig in a little deeper into that impact of housing choice vouchers, particularly in the Bay Area. A few years ago, All Home asked the Stanford Center on Poverty and Inequality to take a look at different household types across the region. You can see there are 3 represented here on this slide. Single adults over 65, single adults under 65, and single parents with 2 children. So we looked at a variety of household types in the region. We looked at their incomes, their typical incomes in certain scenarios, and we compared that to the California poverty threshold to better understand the cost of living gaps that exist for some of the lowest income residents of the region. It shouldn't surprise anyone that those cost of living gaps exist for all household types that we studied. But what's particularly striking, I think, about this slide is that we also modeled the impact of the value of a housing choice voucher for each of these households. You can see that in the pale yellow bars in each of these cases. And so you can see that housing choice vouchers single-handedly closed cost of living gaps for every household type that we studied in the Bay Area. So for those who are eligible to receive a housing choice voucher, it would transform their economic security and close those cost of living gaps. So just a snapshot of the impact of vouchers overall on the lowest income households in our region, and in the region and the state at large. On the next slide, we'll look more specifically at emergency housing vouchers, which is the topic of today's conversation. Folks likely remember that the Emergency Housing Voucher Program was created in 2021 through the American Rescue Plan Act at the height of COVID. It was designed to serve a very particular target population, particularly individuals and families who were experiencing homelessness at the time, were at risk of experiencing homelessness, or were fleeing domestic violence or human trafficking. The American Rescue Plan authorized roughly $5 billion to create this program, serving an estimated 60,000 households across a little over 600 public housing authorities in the US. There were also some really key features to the program that were designed to support this population in accessing housing. And some of those are listed here on that slide. There were extended timelines for households and families to search for housing. There were additional flexibilities for self-certification of documents to increase the speed at which households could get leased up and get into housing. There were allowances for pre-inspection of units, higher payment standards, and additional service fees that housing authorities had latitude to use for a number of things, including incentives and incentives for landlords to lease up these units. And there's been some great research done, particularly by the Urban Institute, about how communities across the state utilized these resources, utilized the flexibility to see really remarkable lease-up rates and success of housing a population that can be difficult to serve and difficult to find housing for, particularly with speed. So let's move to the next slide. And just to put it into context, EHVs, there were roughly 15,000 EHV households served in California, and about 3,500 of them in the Bay Area. All 9 counties were represented. All 9 counties received emergency housing vouchers. And so there are these EHVs and these households being served by the program currently. With that, I think I'm going to close and turn it to our panel so we can hear from a few of our local partners. But before I do that, I want to talk very briefly about the threats that we're seeing to both EHVs and to housing choice vouchers overall before we dive in. Most urgently, to Ken's point just a moment ago, the Emergency Housing Voucher Program was initially conceived of lasting through 2035 when it was authorized. But because of a number of factors, including rapidly rising rents and inflation, many housing authorities across the country are seeing their funding and anticipating their funding rather to expire in 2026 at the earliest. There is no proposal currently on the table at the federal level to extend the funding for these vouchers. And so communities like those here in our region are in the midst of planning for how to ensure that households that are being served with emergency housing vouchers today stay housed. That's our most urgent and immediate threat, perhaps, but there are other threats certainly to name here. Folks know that we are in the midst of an appropriations process at the federal level as well that has implications for the Section 8 program overall. Both the House and the Senate appropriations proposal provide marginal increases to the program overall, which functions as an effective cut because, again, of how rents rise year to year and with inflationary pressures. So there are some estimates that as many as 300 or 400,000 families may not be served by vouchers in the future because those vouchers cannot be used again once they turn over. So there's that particular threat to voucher funding overall. And then finally, there are some additional proposals on the table that partners at the federal and state level are raising alarm bells about. One is something you may have seen coming out of the Trump administration, which is a proposal to consolidate all federal rental assistance into a state-run block grant known as SRAP. This would come with a 40% cut to rental assistance overall. We're tracking this closely to see how Congress responds to the Trump administration's proposal. It is not included explicitly in either the Senate or the House appropriations proposals to date, but is something we're tracking closely. And then here as well, folks have likely seen proposals to implement time limits on rental assistance, as well as even more recently, suggestions to eliminate housing assistance for households rather, with at least one undocumented immigrant. So there are, to be clear, a number of threats that we face to this program. We won't cover them all today. We're here specifically to speak about and learn from our partners in the region who are implementing emergency housing vouchers and thinking about the future of that program and serving those households and families. So with that, I think I'll turn it to our panel. And we'll get...
Are you going to do an introduction?
Yes. Hi, Preston.
Hi.
I'll introduce our panelists, and then we'll hand it to Santa Clara County first, and then Marin. Preston Prince is here. Preston is the Executive Director of the Santa Clara County Housing Authority. He's joined by KJ Kaminsky, the Director of the Santa Clara Office of Supportive Housing, and I believe another partner from the Santa Clara County Housing Authority, Angie, is here as well. They'll kick us off with a presentation about Santa Clara County's experience, and then we'll hear from our partners in Marin County, Samantha Gazowski, the Director of Supportive Housing at the Marin Housing Authority, and Gary Najaris, Director of Homelessness and Coordinated Care at the Marin County Department of Health and Human Services. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Preston and the team in Santa Clara County to get us started talking about their experience administering EHVs in Santa Clara County and how you are addressing the funding cliff in your community.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I'm going to say a few words, and then KJ will talk a little bit about the history of how we used our EHVs, and then come back to me to talk a little bit about how we're addressing the uncertainty. But I wanted to start off just by saying thank you to when Susanna called me up and said that she wanted to have a conversation around EHVs. I reached out to my other peers, and I know that Patricia, Joseph, Debbie are on the call, and I besides Samantha from Housing Authority, and I'm sure that there are others. And we, Susanna, you've already said it, we can't solve this problem alone, and so I really appreciate this opportunity to have a conversation about this situation. I also want to say Joseph from Contra Costa and Patricia and I are doing a panel at NPH's conference in early October, and that's going to really talk about the kind of the full pressure that we experience within the Housing Choice Voucher Program. So I really want to encourage you, those of you who are coming to NPH, to come to that session. The bottom line is that I feel, and I've been in this industry for 35 years, I've never seen this kind of situation. There's been threats, but every day I wake up just thinking about the cruelty that we're experiencing and the uncertainty, and it just makes for like really rough days. And so it feels great to be with you all to talk about this situation, to think about how we can really find some solutions for our families and for our communities. And so with that, I'll turn it over to you, KJ. You could talk about, I think you're going to talk about how we administer the program, and then come back to me about some of the dangers that we're facing.
Yep. That sounds good. Thanks, Preston. Thanks, Susanna, for inviting us to join. I'm KJ Kaminsky. My pronouns are she, her. And you know, we are very fortunate in Santa Clara County to have a foundation of a strong relationship between the COC, the county, the housing authority, our partners at Destination Home. So we were able to come together when EHBs were initially allocated to develop a strategy that supported our overall community-wide strategy and built on the relationships we had already had, or the coordination we had already had between the county and the housing authority and our other partners. And what we did at the time, there was good synergy with our community-wide Heading Home campaign, which was a campaign to end family homelessness. So we worked with the housing authority to develop a strategy for allocating the vouchers that would support families, the majority of them supporting families in our community. And we had two strategies around how to use these vouchers to support the families that needed the most. One was, and this is the majority of them, went to families who were on our community queue that were currently experiencing either sheltered or unsheltered homelessness. It was the first time, I think, in our history of running our coordinated entry system and our shelter hotline that we were pulling families directly from the shelter hotline that had been assessed and is needing permanent housing support. But they were, instead of going to a shelter first, we were able to pull them directly into a permanent housing program utilizing these EHBs. So that was the vast majority of them were coming from our community queue, and prioritized for these vouchers. And then we also looked at our rapid rehousing. We did a deep dive into folks who were in our rapid rehousing programs and looked at families who were severely rent burdened and unlikely to be able to assume rent in the near future when their rapid rehousing subsidy ended, and allocated some EHV vouchers to those families who were experiencing that rent burden and were likely to return to homelessness after their rapid rehousing subsidy ended. So those were the two strategies we used. And as part of our Heading Home campaign, I think we also allocated funding from prevention and our permanent supportive housing system and rapid rehousing system focused on families. But really the EHVs, I think, were just super critical to our family homelessness campaign. And since 2021, we've housed, I think, over 2,400 families now in Santa Clara County, and that is nearly 8,000 people. So EHVs were used to really support a campaign that are in the works and had partnerships established, but really kind of catalyzed that campaign and gave us resources to serve families in ways that we had never had in the past, and were able to have an impact that we just haven't been able to do with our existing resources. So right now we have a lot of families in these programs, and just grateful to partnership with the housing authority and thinking through that strategy and the willingness to work together to find a way to have as significant an impact as possible.
Thanks, KJ. And I think that that's a great launching point for the few things I want to convey. The first is within our EHV, every community, every COC, every housing authority, that partnership led to a different plan, right? And which I think was the beauty around EHV. And it was wildly successful. It was the EHV program nationally was leased up very quickly. We learned a lot of lessons around the incentives and that we need, or the assistance dollars that we need to make sure that the voucher could be leased up in a very quick manner. For us, it was like 2,000 kids within the EHV. I might be rounding up, might be 17 or 1,800, but a lot of kids, which really made us feel really proud at the Housing Authority of the impact that we're doing and the collaboration between the county, the city, Destination Home, all of our partners. We were spending a lot of time going around the country talking about how we crafted a very unique family-focused program with our EHV and getting a lot of kind of recognition around that. And so that's why it was really hard for us to, find out that a program that we thought was going to be funded for 10 years was going to end, and the funding was going to end in 2026. And what's happening at the federal level is pretty cynical. So whether you talk with the elected officials, the Republicans on the House and Senate side on the appropriations, or if you talk at HUD with the current administration's senior executives, they basically are saying this is a program that was created under Biden. It was a Biden mistake, that the money is running out and it's not their responsibility to fix. And so that is kind of the narrative. That is the tenor of what we're getting. So of the 60,000 EHVs nationally, about 25% are leased up in California. I kind of bring that up because I think about those who are on this call, who is in our federal delegation is not the ones who are voting about, not extending the funding. And so it's like we kind of have a really hard row to hoe, right? How do we get federal support for a program when our delegation already supports it? So like, what's our successes or what's our strategies is kind of difficult. I want to point out that every housing authority, again, had a different approach. Every COC housing authority had a different approach. And what is being asked of us with the funding is that we have to absorb the vouchers, the HV vouchers, into our existing programs. And every housing authority has a different situation. There are housing authorities like Joseph and Contra Costa that are in shortfall, so they don't have the ability to absorb. I thought it was 193 EHVs. Versus Santa Clara, which might be on the other end, where we have the ability to absorb, but it's going to take us a couple of years to absorb the 1,000 or so EHV vouchers. If we absorb, it means that we're not going to be able to project-based vouchers for new development. We're not going to be able to serve people off of our current list. We may not be able to do local non-traditional activities that we're able to do under Move to Work. So every housing authority kind of has a different impact of this edict coming from HUD. There was a HUD notice that said, absorb your vouchers. By the way, they finally did a study and they realized that only 25% of the EHV vouchers are going to be, that housing authorities only have the ability to absorb about 25% of the EHV vouchers. And I think that might be the catalyst for funding at the federal level, where people are going to say, like, this is just too many formerly homeless families or individuals who are going to become homeless again. So maybe there'll be funding, but we'll see whether that comes together. I'm happy to kind of stop talking now, and we're going to get to some questions and answers. Love to hear what Samantha has been doing and thinking about this. And then, of course, there's a time later on for like Debbie and Joseph and Patricia to also speak up, and for Angie to answer questions about the steps we're taking and the help we need from you all to handle this very critical situation.
Thank you, Preston. Thank you, KJ, for laying that out in Santa Clara County. Let's turn right to Samantha and Gary to hear from Marin.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having us to be able to share today. I'll share just briefly from the county side, but then want to turn it over quickly to Samantha, who has all the good information and next steps on what we're doing. But first, I think one of the things that positioned us, to be able to manage a situation like this was our strong relationship with the Housing Authority to begin with. So the county and the Housing Authority have long had a memorandum of understanding, with each other about how we operate when it comes to working with our unhoused population. And so that has helped us to really develop, deepen our relationship, and I think prepare for the times when there are these unusual, types of situations that pop up. That long working relationship, I think, really helps facilitate, the brainstorming, the problem solving, the thinking of possibilities, conversation of what can really happen when the federal government or others really change their priorities unexpectedly, based on a previous promise. So when we were originally trying to utilize the EHVs that we were allocated in Marin, our initial focus was that we were trying to look at some of those more self-sufficient, like a little bit less complex cases, lower needs, like perhaps not our chronically homeless folks, et cetera, folks that could have sustainability, or move to sustainability when and if the program ended in the future. Unfortunately, as we dug into it, looked at our client list, like look at what was available, what became clear was that focus alone was not going to work, that we needed to broaden our perspective. And a number of our clients, with some pretty serious issues, chronic homelessness, ended up moving under this program as well. So when the precipitous end to this happened with the feds, I think raised some unique questions of like, there are folks here that we don't want to allow to exit back into homelessness. Certainly, we wouldn't want to see anyone, receiving any of these vouchers exiting back into homelessness if they're not at a point of sufficiency. But certainly, there were a number of priority clients here that we want to make sure to do a very structured and warm handoff to a different kind of solution. So really appreciate the partnership of the Marin Housing Authority and being able to brainstorm around that and look at what the possibilities were in us being able to make that kind of supportive transition. So I'll turn it over to Samantha at this point, so she can describe what's happening over there and where we're currently at.
Hi, everyone, and thank you to All Home for having us and having Gary and I. And yeah, I think Preston did a great job of just providing this overview of our current climate. So I'll kind of dig in a little bit of how we got to where we are with our utilization, and then how we're kind of addressing this uncertainty moving forward. So we were allocated the Marin Housing Authority 117 EHVs. We do currently have 96 households leased. And when I joined here in the fall of 2021, we were pretty close to issuing most all of those vouchers. And as Gary discussed, it was really because of our close collaboration coordination with the county's homeless department, which kind of allowed us to quickly create the MOU to move forward and start working with coordinated entry immediately to get people identified, eligible households identified, and issue these vouchers.
No problem.
So just quickly, some of like our demographics of the folks that we have leased right now, we've got about 39% that are seniors, 35% of our households are families, 47% state that they have a disability, and 93% are extremely low income. A few things that really helped us get leased up really quickly. We've had a landlord partnership program since 2017 where we've had funding from the county that provided things like security deposits and vacancy loss and things like damage funding. And so we had policies and procedures that were already in place to really quickly issue deposits, and as well as having a housing location team to help identify landlords that would participate in the program. So that team works really closely with the housing case management teams in the county. They were doing coordination calls on a weekly basis. And then our manager was doing like kind of housing 101 trainings to really make sure that case managers knew our process. And that really, really helped lease up quickly. So in regards to how we're addressing the funding uncertainty, I'll speak to the steps that we're currently taking. So we reviewed the PH notice and determined that we would establish a waitlist preference to add our EHV households to our HCV waitlist. Currently, we see ourselves as having funding through about September of 2026 for our households, and we have submitted a waiver request to HUD that would allow us to place all of our EHV households on our wait list with the EHV preference. And so we're waiting on a decision from HUD on that. In addition to the EHV preference, we've determined that we'll allow the higher payment standard to remain in place as long as the households continue to reside in their current units. And if at any point in the future that tenant moves, then they would be going back to the current payment standard. Something else that we have been addressing and analyzing is considering other voucher types that EHV households could be transferred to, including our mainstream vouchers. So we're currently in shortfall for mainstream, but plan to transition those qualified households once we can start issuing those vouchers. We do also have a COC program in our agency that we will be able to transfer qualified households based on our county COC policies, where we can transfer within permanent supportive housing programs that are part of the COC. So we've worked to identify a handful of people that, as we have attrition in that program, we can transfer within the permanent supportive housing program. We are currently in shortfall for HCV, but we anticipate that we'll be able to start pulling households from our wait list of up to 10 per month, hopefully starting in January of 2026. So those are some of the ways that we're trying to address making sure that we can get people and folks transferred over to our HCV wait list.
That's great. Thank you, Samantha. Thank you, Gary, for that overview. A couple of things that are standing out to me to emphasize from what I've heard from both teams. Strong relationships existed prior to you all receiving your EHVs and are critical for the high utilization rate and lease-up rates that you have seen with administering the program. That's really great to see. Two different approaches to serving different households with EHVs, and interesting to hear how you navigated that process. And then both in different situations, and this is clearly true across California, when it comes to being able to absorb those EHV vouchers into different places in the COC or into different vouchers or different subsidy sources, and to emphasize that all of our housing authorities are in a slightly different place here.